Thank you so much for doing this with us today. Obviously, this is part of our Women on Women series, which is all about, talking to different women in different kind of roles and industries where they might have made changes or where they're in a male-dominated market. You have made a career move. Tell us what you did before and tell us what you do now.
So it has been kind of a bit of a roundabout journey. I actually, at the very start, I went to art school. I was working as a freelance photographer and kind of doing more of like just straight arts side of things. And then from there, I started to get more interested in kind of the arts administration side. So I did a master's degree in museum education and then moved into arts administration for museums, galleries, membership professional institutions.
Wow.
Yeah, and then was working as a membership manager for a few years and like kind of more on that side of, working in arts-based institutions.
Was that because you were just passionate about art and wanted to get in? What made that kind of, rather than going down the pure artist route, what made you then sort of think, right, I'm interested in museums and that kind of thing? Where did that come from?
Oh, actually, specifically that side of things was because I was always using museums as like a source of inspiration for my own work,
Yeah.
for research, and just because of how beneficial I found it, that was when I started to think like, actually, I sort of want to get more involved on that side of things because I think more people need to sort of see the value of these types of institutions.
Yeah, it's true. People
Yeah.
don't. And kids don't so much because everything's online and we'll get to that. So it's sort of finding that move. So you made that move into that and then you were doing your administration side and then what happened?
So because of like the membership role is very kind of the software that you're using.
Right.
And then you start to find things that like, well, actually, this doesn't work. This system isn't, it's outdated. This process could be better,
Yeah.
and better for these organizations and better for business processes. And it was kind of going through that simultaneous to just being like always just sort of interested in coding.
Right.
So it was always something that I was kind of doing like on the evenings, the weekends, and I go to meetups and like little workshops.
When did you start doing that? So you obviously, was that when you were studying that you got into sort of doing a bit of coding on the side, or how did that come about?
It started to creep in a little bit when I was studying, just because as part of that, you need to have a website for your
Yes.
art. So I built my website, and then for other kind of roles that I was doing on the side, and doing photography for like an organization and building a website for them, and then
Right.
so it was just kind of like it was always
It's
sort
not
of there in the
wonderful. Yeah.
background. So yeah, it was when I moved to London that I started to get a little bit more involved in like the meetups and things.
Right.
And really starting to focus on it because especially as like, as working with software that probably wasn't really up to kind of standard of what I needed during the day. It just sort of started
Yeah.
to look a little bit more into like, how can I fix this? So yeah, that was kind of like what sort of prompted me
To
to
do it.
start to.
And then how did you make the leap into it directly? So you were doing that and then there were problems with this other, because actually when you think about museums and art, you don't naturally think software engineering. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like from an external, you don't think, oh, I know a museum, because that's sort of the old and the new, that's the complete contrast, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thing. So how did that then come about?
Well, the kind of main catalyst was, well, I suppose I was doing the day job as like a membership manager, and then I was working with the software, and it wasn't quite it. It just wasn't really working for the organization. So we're having meetings with like all these other with the software engineers, and then just trying to like kind of balance between explaining like the business side of things, and then how would you translate that to actually creating the software, that I started to kind of see a little bit more of like, well, maybe
Yeah. Yeah.
at the end, I decided to end up doing a coding boot camp just because I needed that like sort of focused time and just really like blocked off, and then kind of like have the support of fellow students as well to
Was
it.
there a lot of people making career changes on the boot camp with you?
I'd say it was like half and half. Some it was more of like sort of a pivot, like if they were doing
Right.
working in like a tech-based organization and then wanting to go more into like the actual engineering side of things. Um,
And my second question to that is, was there a lot of other women on the course?
Mine was unique in that it was half and half.
Right.
But
Great.
yeah, so it was like I can't remember if it was every week or I think it was every 3 weeks. There was like a new cohort that came in.
Right.
So mine was half and half. There were generally more men to women, probably like, 2/3 to 1/3.
Okay.
But yeah, at least mine was
Yeah,
half.
50-50. Yes, girls, come on. And then once you'd done your boot camp, did you feel ready to just go out and get a different job?
It was easy, but I was very lucky with timing,
Right.
because right when I was finishing, we had sort of guess sort of like a careers department who had networks with other companies who might be looking for people who were finishing the boot camp,
Right.
and people looking to hire. So at the time that I was finishing, there was an arts database company who was
Perfect.
looking for, yeah, exactly. So I in that respect, I was very lucky that it was just right place, right time.
If you're going for your first job, is it good to be doing something in something you have previous knowledge in, or is it doesn't really matter, it's the code that's important?
I'm not really sure the best way to answer that because for me it was like definitely a benefit because I understood like the
The
sort of
product.
client side. Yeah, and it like sort of affected the way that I like could change. Well, I guess just like how I went about solving problems.
Right.
Because I think at the end of the day, sort of when it comes to developing software and developing apps and things, it is just sort of problem solving with code. So I think depending on sort of like it will affect the way that you approach the problems and sort of the solutions that you come to.
And also
Um,
how it needs to work for the types of user and engagement it's going to get. So basically for its purpose, right? You need to
yeah.
sort of have it. So obviously you picked a boot camp. How did you go about choosing the boot camp that you did? Were you driven by the language, by the programming language, by how did you pick it? Because there's millions out there, and if people are watching this thinking, where would I start?
Mhm.
Tell us what you did.
I did look at a few, but the reason why I chose the one that I did was because at the time they were like the only boot camp that offered a tuition deferment,
Right.
which I think a lot of them, at least at the time, maybe there are some more that they just didn't offer that. You had to pay the full amount of the boot camp up front, which, coming
Crazy.
from an arts,
Yeah.
like, I didn't have that kind of money.
I'm an artist. No. As soon as you went on that boot camp, did you think, yes, this is what I want to do with my life? Or was it overwhelming at first? How did it feel?
At first, yeah, it was a little bit overwhelming. The first week is always
Worst.
apparently because you're learning more of like kind of the uh, fundamentals and like sort of software design patterns, and that just felt like such a new,
Crazy.
like it's very different from when you're just sort of learning and like trying to teach yourself, which I've been doing before. So it was like, okay, now I'm not just learning how to code, I'm learning a new way to think about how to create this.
Right.
Um,
When I speak to people who have transitioned into software engineering, a lot of them have come from either a science background or a creative background. Do you think that's why is that? Is that because they enjoy creating, because it's quite different, isn't it? It's quite
mm,
different. Why do you think that those kind of attributes help you?
yeah, I will always hold the torch for arts and creative education. I think for me, it was just so like beneficial to kind of be able to learn like just creative problem solving because that was always sort of the way that I thought about the world and I saw the
Yeah.
world about it in like sort of visual terms and kind of processes and those sorts of things. So yeah, I think kind of how it, I guess, translates is just it feels like most of the job is like that creative thinking and the creative problem solving.
People
Um,
don't often think about software engineering like that, I think. If they're not
mm,
in it, they think of it as a boring kind of putting, do you know what I mean? It's like years ago, when I was young, I had a Amstrad computer or something like or
yeah,
Acorn Electron, and I wrote all this code. I got a programming book and I wrote like 4 pages of code, and then all that happened was this little man walked along and waved and went off,
yeah,
and it took me like, you know, I don't know, I'm going to say like 3 weeks of just sitting there. So obviously that didn't feel like problem solving, but it was really cool. And at the end of it, I'd created this man, which sounds
yeah,
really stupid, but obviously back then there wasn't like, you know, amazing animation or whatever. And so I think people forget that the code element is creative, you know,
mhm,
because what you put on, what code you put together dictates, you know, that's really cool, isn't it? It's like,
yeah, yeah.
that's really cool. And were the people on your course and your boot camp, were they from all different backgrounds? Were they all different kinds of people? Or were they similarly creative?
No, they were all different, really. I mean, there were so many different, yeah, just types of backgrounds. I mean, some were sort of more on like kind of more the technical, had done a little bit of software,
Right.
fintech, sort of financial side of things, or but some, I mean, they were kind of more on, well, somebody who was involved in like music licensing, somebody who worked in like diamonds previously. Like it's just from all.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because software isn't everything. So it's like,
yeah,
you know, people think of fine, they think of software like they think of banking. Not there's anything wrong with being in banking before I get any, but do you know what I mean? It's sort of like, it's not like that because it depends what your product is, what your engagement is. So advice, just to round off, thank you very much for sharing this. Like, I love talking to different people and understanding their background. If somebody's watching this and they're thinking, I want to do a boot camp or I want to start my journey in software engineering, is there a particular route you think is best to do? Like, is it self-learn first, then join a boot camp? And if it is join a boot camp, is it better to do particular languages first, or do you think it doesn't matter?
I don't think it necessarily matters. I think I would definitely advise like always just try teaching yourself first. There's so many free resources out there, so many. And
Yeah.
just like try to focus on like just building something. Like don't try to, oh, I need to learn this language or I need to do this and because it's going to get me there. Like just get started. There's free resources, there's tons of stuff that you can just like learn, like little apps and like little things that you can just start building to kind of build that confidence and feel like,
Yeah.
just get your toes into the
I
water.
did an amazing website. Do you include your first ever website that you made in your portfolio?
Oh no. No, there's so many. No, no, no. Yeah, no, I
Do
just
you look back on that now and think I've come so far?
yeah, definitely. I mean, if I think back to like my very, very first website, it was like a GeoCities, like Tamagotchi website, it
Oh
was
my
just
god,
like way
geez.
back in the day.
I loved it. Where have they gone? I don't even know if Tamagotchi still exists.
I don't know. I don't know. I was thinking about mine recently and I thought, oh
I was
god,
obsessed with mine. I was
yeah.
absolutely obsessed with mine. Do you remember that? And they all sort of took them out of school. I don't know.
Yes.
I'm showing my age now. Thank you so much, so much for your time.
Yeah.
I, really appreciate the fact that you've come from a really different background. And I think part of the reason I wanted to talk to you was because, for this reason that you can come from a creative background and it's about building something it's also about the company you work for and the product you're building. So it's good to think carefully about that as well, when you're working forward. Thank you very, very, very much. And
Thank
I
you.
probably will, I'll link some information down below, maybe of some suggestions you might have of starting points that people could have a look at and things like that, or resources you might have found helpful to you as a good starting point. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.